Welcome to the Arrive U.S. Immigration Law podcast with your hosts Jeremy Richards and Christine Jurusik. Join us as we navigate the complex world of U.S. immigration law with a special focus on opportunities and challenges for Canadians and Mexicans under the USMCA. Whether you're a professional, business owner, or family member seeking to work and live in the United States, we're here to guide you every step of the way. So sit back and relax. You have arrived.
Welcome back to another episode of the Arrive podcast. And today I think we have a good discussion coming for you. We're going to be talking about the first 100 days of Donald Trump. And we're a little over 100 days now, but we're enough into his administration that we know what the agenda is. We've seen this put into action, and we know how this is impacting immigrants in general, but specifically Canadians. Again, the majority of our clients are Canadians, and that's why we have this podcast, helping Canadians understand U.S. immigration. So we have seen how these changes have impacted Canadians on a daily basis. We have clients going to the consulate, going to the border, airport on a regular basis, filing applications with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So we see how these changes are impacting Canadians' ability to live and work in the United States. So that's what we're going to discuss today. What are these changes? How has it impacted Canadians in the real world? And also talking about some of the stuff you've heard in the headlines and the news. And do you have to be concerned? Does that apply to you? Do you fall in the bucket of somebody who should be concerned about traveling to the United States? So I'm going to start with something that I've tried to put out there as much as I possibly can whenever I have the opportunity. And if you go to the Canadian government's website, and they have a travel advisory on the Canadian government website. And on the Canadian government website, if you go there, it gives you a travel advisory for any country as a Canadian that you want to visit. You can look up, if you want to go to Kuwait, it's going to tell you what their advisory is on Canadian citizens visiting Kuwait. And it's going to tell you what to be careful of. Well, you can do the same for the United States. You go under the Canadian government website, you look up a travel advisory for the United States, and they have different levels of travel advisory. And it goes from green to yellow to red. And I don't remember exactly what each level means. All I know is that the green level is travel as usual. And in fact, it also says take the same precautions as you would as a Canadian within Canada under that advisory level. Well, guess what the advisory level is to the United States? It's green. And the caution that the Canadian government is advising Canadians to take if you're coming to the United States, whether it's for work or as a visitor, is green. Travel as usual. You should take the same precautions as you've always taken when coming to the United States and the same precautions as you would traveling throughout Canada. That is from the Canadian government. So I think that's very important that the Canadian government sees no concern for Canadians. They have no additional advisory or advice when traveling to the United States outside of the normal precautions. Now, there are some changes, and we'll talk about those. There's two big changes that came down for anybody, and it's not just Canadians. One of them just happened, what is it, today? This is the 9th. So 2 days ago on the 7th is Real ID. And Real ID isn't as big of an issue as a lot of people are making it. So most international travelers to the United States, like a Canadian, for example, already has a Real ID. Canadians traveling to the United States are traveling either on a Canadian passport or a Nexus card predominantly. That's how we see Canadians come to the U.S. Those are both Real IDs. They're both Real ID compliant. I see this Real ID law really impacting U.S. citizens who are trying to travel outside of the United States that may not have a passport or may be traveling on another type of document, but it's also domestic travel. And I think that's where this comes into play. So Canadians are already here on a passport or a Nexus card or on a visa. You already are Real ID compliant. So this really impacts U.S. citizens traveling domestically or those already in the United States, because a U.S. citizen could just use a standard driver's license before, right? well, not anymore. I was just traveling, and when I was going through TSA, they were advising everybody, and this was just a last week, so it was a week before, and they were advising everybody that didn't have a real ID, just so you know, you can travel with this today, but if you're going to travel after the 7th, you need to make sure you have a real ID compliant document. And again, that's domestic travel for U.S. citizens who are used to traveling on their driver's license. Well, that's not going to work anymore. They need a real ID to travel domestically. But international travelers, such as Canadians,
when you come in with your passport,
you're already meeting it. So for Canadians, I don't really see this changing anything.
Yeah, and I looked up those travel advisory things that you were talking about a minute ago on the Canadian government website, and they have 4 classifications for countries.
Oh, yeah, they have an orange, too.
The worst one is avoid all travel, so we're talking about like Sudan, Myanmar, those kind of countries, right? Avoid all travel. Then next is orange, avoid non-essential travel. And we're talking Israel and the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Obviously, that would be not a good place to go to right now. Papua New Guinea, and they have a couple, Ethiopia, on that list of orange travel. Then the yellow one, which most countries fall into this, are going to be exercise a high degree of caution. We have Pakistan, we have India on that list, we have Cuba on that list, Turks and Caicos, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica. So if you're
countries
a Canadian,
that Canadians travel there all the time.
Canadians
with no
go
concern.
all the time to these
and
countries, right? And they are Mexico, right? You go to Mexico on vacation to Cancun, you're more at risk. Exercise high degree of caution to travel to those countries where Canadians regularly travel for vacation, where the United States is in the highest category, which is take normal security precautions.
Well, the lowest category.
Lowest. I guess the lowest, yeah.
Yeah, agree.
It doesn't get any better than that. The other countries on that list include Norway, Argentina, Aruba, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, United States, Portugal, Suriname, Brunei, those kind of countries.
That's a good point.
Those are the green countries.
I didn't dig into like which countries were on which list.
So if you're going to Jamaica, you're at higher risk than going to the United States.
Or Mexico. Or Cuba. Yeah, just like you said, those are places Canadians go on a frequent basis.
Very frequently, yes.
And yeah, much more risk than the United States. That's a good point.
Yep. So if you are Canadian and you are trying to choose somewhere safe to travel, I would
choose the United States.
Well,
it's on
I would
the safe list.
I mean, you don't have to choose the United States, but choose one of the countries that is take normal security precautions. Green, check that advice online before you book your travel to make sure that you're going somewhere where you're going to feel safe.
Yeah, good point. In Real ID, you're probably meeting it. Just make sure if you're traveling on your passport or your Nexus
if you're traveling internationally,
you're going to be using it.
And the airline's accepting your ID, then it's going to be...
You meet it.
Yeah, you meet the requirements.
Yep. And just another note on that, if you're not already aware, Canadians, there's this rule. It's called the 6-month rule for passports when traveling to the United States. That your passport must be valid for at least 6 months beyond your visit. Or
that doesn't apply to Canadians, just so you know.
I was getting.
Oh,
there.
you're getting there. I thought you were going to say it did.
Canadians are exempt from that rule.
Yes, they are.
So a lot of these rules that we're talking about, when you're a Canadian, there's an exception carved out for you. So it doesn't really apply. So Real ID, although it does apply and you have to use it,
you probably already have it.
Yeah, and it more closely applies to Americans, actually. So it impacts Americans' travel inside the United States by airline.
So many U.S. citizens just have like a regular driver's license that doesn't comply with the Real ID, and they don't even know, right? Because you get your driver's license from the DMV, you think, hey, this is great. But it didn't ask all the questions or require all the background documentation to be classified as Real ID. And so then your ID really is not compliant with domestic airline travel.
It's a security issue, right? They want to verify that the person with that ID is really the person traveling.
Yeah.
So again, Canadians, you're probably already compliant. If you're using that Nexus card or your passport, you have nothing to worry about. So all the discussion about Real ID, you can probably put that to sleep. And the other one is the alien registration requirement. And we've talked about this already before, and we've seen that rolled out. The border really doesn't follow this, meaning they're not really concerned about your registration. It's business as usual at the border. This isn't a requirement that CBP is making sure is enforced. They're going to admit you as they always have as a Canadian. So if you're flying, you're probably going to be admitted with an I-94 record of admission, as they always have as a Canadian, which meets the registration requirement. If you're driving, however, it may be what I call the smile and a wave entry, where they're not officially recording your entry with an I-94 record of admission.
Yeah, it seems to be optional.
Yes.
When you're traveling by
and you
car.
can't, and the CBP has given instruction not to tell people not to request an I-94 if you're traveling by border. So it's their discretion. And why? Well, if everybody coming by land requested an I-94, though, you're going to have lines backed up for miles.
If they're requesting it at the border, at the port of entry when you show up.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying the pre-registration, which you should do. We would advise that.
Yeah.
But if you're land port, it's the discretion of the officer to admit you on that I-94 or not, and how long they're going to admit you. And if you come in and you're staying over 30 days, you pull your I-94, as we've discussed, through the CBP I-94 website and with your Canadian passport, and it doesn't pull up a record of admission, then that's when you would need to comply with the G325R registration requirement after those 30 days and make sure you meet it. It's not a big deal. And then, as you were saying, your parents just did this, right?
Oh, yeah.
The pre-registration?
Yeah, I helped them through it.
So they
were coming for 32 days.
32 days. So 2 days over the 30.
Yeah. So they wanted to make sure they complied. So they just went online about 3 days before they left and came to the United States, and they completed the I-94 online requirements, and they were admitted not for the full 6 months that, is kind of default for Canadians a lot of time. They were admitted for an extra 30 days beyond the 32 days that they said they were going to be here for. So it kind of gave them a buffer to get back.
But easy process, right?
Yeah, very straightforward. They paid $6 each, I think, online to have the I-94 issued. And once they entered, I don't think the border officer knew what to do with them, because I told them not to, but they gave the receipt, because that's all you really get when you do this, was a receipt for paying for it. And the border officer looked at it and he said, oh, okay, you're going to have to hang on to that, and you'll need that when you give your fingerprints. And they were very confused and called me right away. And I'm like, yeah, there's no fingerprint requirement.
Canadians are exempt from the
You're fine.
requirement.
Just, if they issued the I-94 exactly under the information that you provided and put it in, it was issued automatically, and you're fine. So you don't have to complete the G325R. You can stay till, I think it was until May 25th they got admitted till, and they were good.
Yeah, so that's what we advise. So if you're coming by land and you want to make sure, then do the I-94 in advance, either through CBP's website or the CBP Home app. And you can pay for that up front and register your entry, and then you're already compliant.
Yep, and you don't have to say anything to the border officer that you've filed that, because it should automatically link
to your passport.
Yeah, it should automatically just populate when they enter your passport information on entry. So
yep. And the other thing to keep in mind is, if you are a permanent resident of the United States, or you have a work visa such as a TN, an L, or an E, you already meet the registration requirement. So, or if you're in the United States and you apply for a benefit in the United States, such as maybe you're applying for a green card through your spouse or whatever it might be, that registers you as well, and that meets the registration requirement. So it's really a small number of people that need to be concerned about this. It's really land entry, where you're just being admitted on your passport and they're not giving you that I-94. So the advice we would give here is pay attention. If you're in the United States and you're going to be here over 30 days, just take your passport to CBP's website and then verify, how did they admit you? And it'll pull up with your passport. You'll look at this, what's called an I-94 record. You'll be able to see the day you came in the country. You'll be able to see how they admitted you, your status, such as a visitor or a TN. And it also indicates when you have to leave by. So just make sure you know what that is and you comply with it.
I encourage people to print that out and have a copy with them while they're in the United States. If you get pulled over by law enforcement and they start asking questions about what you're doing here, you're going to be able to show them, hey, I'm here as a visitor. Here's when I came in. Here's the information. You have it right there.
And actually, by law, you're supposed to have it, right?
Yep.
And they've said they're enforcing that. So you're supposed to carry proof of your status with you at all times as a foreign traveler in the United States.
Yeah, and if you don't have a printout, I mean, you can do it electronically. I'm just old and I always think of paper, but
Yeah. Have a copy on your phone or something.
yeah, save a copy on your phone.
Again, if you use the CBP Home app, it's going to all be right there. You can just whip out the app and show it, and you're good. So not really much to be concerned about. I think the news around it was a lot worse than the actual
I think you really just need to think of it in terms of, we all remember ArriveCan.
Yes.
Back during COVID, when you had to return to Canada after traveling outside the country, you had to complete the ArriveCan app on your phone, or if you were a visitor coming to Canada, you had to do it too.
Same thing.
It's the same thing.
Yep. Not a big deal.
No.
Just do
You
it.
just got to pay for it, though. ArriveCan was free.
Well, you've always had to pay for an I-94, though, right?
Yeah. I just think the Canadian government didn't think about monetizing that at the time, or else they would have, for sure.
That's true. Any way to
Anyway,
collect money.
yeah, at the border. They like collecting money at the border.
I know. I think it's funny. You have to pay that. You walk across to Canada and Niagara Falls, and you have to throw the quarters in the machine. And yeah, anyway.
Yeah, well, it's they're
collect
more
it wherever
focused
they
on the
can.
duties, collecting the duties from the Canadian residents.
So real ID, not a big deal. G325R, I would say just make sure you're compliant, and you can do that with your passport, and you should be good. The other things that have come up in general with Trump in the first 100 days, what we have seen is, and I would say this is across the board, and it also applies to Canadians, is increased scrutiny and enforcement. Meaning, they're going to really look at your travel history, your immigration history, and your criminal history if you're coming to work or live in the United States. They have always done this, so I wouldn't say it's something necessarily new, but I think that what we've seen is they're taking more time to look into that. So when you are coming in or you have an interview, those interviews are taking longer because they're being more diligent to make sure that they don't miss anything. So these are always things they've looked for, but we have seen that they are picking up on stuff that they may have missed in the past when they do this. So pay attention when you're coming to the United States. Make sure you know your own history. More importantly, be honest about your history. So if you are applying for entry to the U.S. or a visa or a green card, you need to be honest. And the people we see are running into issues are people that are not being honest about their history. They're hiding the fact that they may have been denied entry in the past, or they're trying to hide the fact that they did have a past criminal conviction. Well, they know all of this information. Hiding it is going to get you into far more trouble than disclosing and discussing and getting on your way. Because most of these things are so minor, it's not going to impact you. They just want to make sure you're being honest, that you're not being fraudulent, that you're not trying to hide anything. And there's a couple cases that have done the circulation in the news, and we've talked about them, but it does directly apply to this. Now, one of the questions that we've seen a lot is, can you be what's called a digital nomad and remote work in the United States? And this really came to light because of the Burke case, is what I will refer to it as. And Burke was traveling in the United States, and if I remember right, she was a UK citizen, and she was here vlogging her journey in the United States, and her visit was coming to an end, so she tried to flagpole into Canada to come back to the United States to renew her stay in the United States as a visitor. And when she went into Canada, and this is the funny thing about this story, Canada's actually the one that really got her. It wasn't the U.S. So she went into Canada. Yeah, she went into Canada flagpole. Well, Canada's like, hey, what are you doing? And she explained, and they're like, well, you're working. You can't come into Canada. You don't have a work visa. And what you're doing, we consider work. So they noted that, and they kicked her back to the U.S.
Yeah.
And then now the U.S. has you, oh, Canada says you're working. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, you are working.
They looked up the CBSA chat.
Yep.
And they're like, hey, we're
when they
sending
turn
this
you
girl.
around, they
Yeah.
give you a nice little piece of paper, give this to CBP, and it looks all innocent. No, it's not.
Yeah.
So what happened is CBP found out that she was traveling across the United States, working remotely for her foreign employer while in the United States as what you would refer to as a digital nomad, while vlogging her adventures across the U.S. There is no digital nomad visa in the United States. United States does not differentiate between foreign employment and U.S. employment. If you are in the United States and your purpose is a visitor, well, you should be visiting, not working. And that includes you cannot come for 6 months in the United States, bring your laptop, and then remote work for your Canadian employer while you're here. That is still considered working. Now, could you get away with it? Probably. Wouldn't advise it. If you get caught, you're going to be in the same situation. There is no visa that authorizes you to do that. Now, I will say that if you are coming on vacation and you're going to Florida or Disneyland or, Arizona, wherever it is you prefer to visit in the U.S., and you're here for a couple of weeks and you're answering incidental work emails, that's not what they're talking about. That's considered normal. They consider, answering incidental texts and emails while you're here on a legitimate vacation with your family at Disneyland. That's not what they're talking about. That's not a digital nomad. A digital nomad is somebody who is legit working for an employer while they're here. And then they're traveling throughout the U.S. while working for a foreign employer. And that is not allowed. So be aware. That's what that case brings to light, that there is no digital nomad visa. So that person ran into issues because they were doing something they were not authorized to do. On top of that, they weren't even Canadian, and Canada's the one that triggered the issues for that individual. So I know it's done the circulation in the news in Canada, but really for 99.9% of Canadians doing things right, well,
was that person detained in the United States?
Yeah, they were detained for a long time.
Well, again, they went to a country to
they
which
weren't
they
a
had
citizen of Canada or the U.S.
And they went to a country where they didn't have
status.
Yep. And they asked for they're asking for an immigration benefit from the United States. The United States doesn't have an option.
Yep.
They can't return them to Canada. Where are they going to and say, detained. Oh, yeah. Yep. They have to and send them home.
Foolish. Yep.
Well, you're playing with fire if you're doing that.
So if you are a Canadian and you are doing this digital nomad stuff, well, you may fall into that bucket. So take caution. What you're doing is not authorized in the United States. You can't do that. There is no digital nomad visa. So,
and we talk to a lot of people who are who are doing that, or
the reason why is the reason.
You can get a TN visa to come and do that if you have a U.S. connection, right? So if there's a contract with the U.S. company that you're servicing, or you're
that person has a TN, right? But we run into this issue when it's the spouse. Why? Because TD or dependent can't work. Yeah. So the question is always, hey, my spouse is going to get a TN. I want to work for my Canadian employer on my TD while they're on their TN. You can't do that. Not if you're living here. Now, if you're incidental, you just come to visit for the weekend or whatever, and you answer, sure, that's fine. But if you're living full-time in the U.S., working full-time for your remote Canadian employer on your TD, that is not authorized. That would be considered digital nomad, not authorized. You can study in the United States. You can be a student on a TD, but you cannot work, even for your foreign employer. So we see that a lot. Mm-hmm. So be aware. If you're doing that, you could be violating your immigration status. You need a work visa.
Very true.
So it doesn't authorize that. So that's how it applies to what we see on a regular basis. Dependent visas where they don't have work authorization and they want to work for their foreign employer while they are with their spouse in the U.S., that is not okay. It's not authorized. And the other one is the Mooney case, and this comes up often too. Mooney was the one on the Mexican border, right? Again, what you just said, she wasn't a citizen of Canada or Mexico. So U.S. had
all the news agencies picked up on that one and tried to make it into something
way more than it was.
Yeah.
So she had to be detained because U.S. couldn't release her into Mexico.
No, they would have had to seek specific permission from Mexico to send her back there and say, "Oh, we're refusing your TN, and you can go back to Mexico." They would have had to go through hoops to get specific, and Mexico could have said, "Hey, no, we're not taking her. She's not Mexican."
So they detained her and sent her back to Canada where she belonged. So they did everything above board. And I think,
it was funny when I was reading the news articles for this. I guess she was going off about how uncomfortable she was in immigration detention. I don't know who got the impression that immigration detention was going to be real comfortable or provide you with all kinds of amenities, but that is not what immigration detention is about. So you better expect to be in, prison-like conditions, jail-like conditions. That's what they're like.
It's detention.
You're not being
detained.
Hotel.
Yes.
It's not like COVID when ArriveCan would put you up in a hotel and then you had to pay for it.
ICE is not going to put you in that. That's for sure. And the question I ask Canadians that ask about this Mooney situation and whether or not they should be concerned, I ask them, well, how many of those cases have you seen in the news?
Yeah, just one.
One.
Yeah.
That was it.
Right. If there was more, then trust me, the news would have picked up on those.
One.
Yeah.
And guess how many we've seen? 0.
Yeah.
So unless you are committing fraud, which in the facts that we have here, are that the case was presented that she was doing something that did not comply with her visa, which the U.S. considers fraud, and they would revoke your visa, which the visa was revoked. Tried to circumvent that because it was revoked in the northern border up in Canada, and then tried to go to Mexico and then do the same thing in Mexico, and then was caught because it was already on file. That's another thing to learn here. Every interaction that you have with CBP is in the system. You can't go from Vancouver to Toronto or to the Peace Bridge and then think that they're not talking to each other. They talk. So be careful. If you say one thing at one port and then you go to another port and you say another thing, that's fraud.
There are records of every interaction you have in secondary.
Every interaction. So beware that.
And they do not like overturning the decisions of their colleagues.
They do not.
So if one of them said no, the chances are the second one, unless you have some kind of new information, is going to say no.
Yes, and that's a good point. You have to have something that's going to overcome whatever reason they refuse you the first time. If you can't overcome it, then just, get legal advice if you want to know if you can.
If you make up a lie and create a fraudulent situation and go back to another port of entry.
Bad idea.
I just want to be clear here. This situation that happened to her, it didn't matter when it happened. It could have happened 5 years ago, 2 years ago. That's not 100-day Trump situation. That's something that happened to people before
correct.
The change of administration. You just didn't hear about it in the news, but people who did that, it still happened to them.
Yes. Well, with Mooney, her first issues started under Biden. Her first visa was actually revoked under Biden. She kept trying, and then ultimately the immigration's like, yeah, enough, and then that's when the problems really arose. It just happened to be under Trump.
Let's be clear. CBP is not treating Canadian citizens any different now than they did under the prior administration. That are seeking admission to the United States.
And that would be my experience talking with clients. Now, I did have a client go yesterday for an L1 visa, and this was through Vancouver. And he did say, you know what? I feel like this time was a little more difficult than last time. Mm-hmm. Meaning he had all the right paperwork. Everything was in order. He was still approved for his visa, but he felt like they were being more careful and more diligent. Okay, that's fine. Again, if you're doing it correctly, you have all the documentation.
You face a few more questions.
Big deal.
You're
going through an enforcement agency. You're entering another country.
But that may not have been because of the administration. It may have just been that's the way that officer adjudicates L's.
Correct.
So this is a human being you're dealing with. Some of them have been there for 100 years. Yep. They've done a million L's, and they know what pages to flip to, and they know how to make their decision quickly. Other ones are newer. Or maybe this is, they're getting trained on an L, maybe, on how to do it. And they're going to take their time with it. They're going to have questions. They're going to make sure that they're dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's before they say yes.
Well,
and that could be a personality thing, too.
Very good point. And this morning, I had a client through the Peace Bridge apply for a TN as a management consultant. Same thing as Mooney was applying for. Sailed through, no problems. Mm-hmm. She said, very smooth, easy process.
Yep.
Why? Because she qualified. She had all the documentation in order, and it was
She wasn't
legitimate.
committing fraud.
Yes.
Oh, good.
So she was
That's
fine.
good.
And she's got her TN, no problem this morning.
And even if she didn't, if she had an officer who made a mistake and said, hey, I'm not going to approve this, or I can't approve this today, what would have happened to her?
She'd be returned to Canada and told to come back with the proper documentation.
They would have allowed her to withdraw her application for TN and said, hey, come back when you have this.
Yeah, they don't just detain you for no reason. You really got to, in my experience, you really got to give them a reason.
Yeah, you're making it happen if you're
creating
happening.
more work for them, right?
They don't want to.
They don't want to do more work than they have to.
Yeah.
Like all the paperwork and everything they have to do when they do that.
Yeah.
You really got to give them a reason to do it, in my experience. The other one I want to put to bed is the cell phone electronic thing too.
Oh.
That's all over. Oh, should I get a burner phone? Oh, should I wipe out my laptop? Absolutely not. We're not going to advise you to get a burner phone.
I thought you were going to say absolutely.
No way. Don't delete your apps. You shouldn't be hiding anything.
Well, I mean, if you have something to hide that you don't, maybe you'd be embarrassed if somebody else saw it on your phone.
Be aware they could look at it.
You could look at it. You don't have any rights to privacy at the border with your electronic devices.
But let's talk about it in real world situations. In reality, they're not going to look at your phone or your laptop again unless you give them
of times.
reason.
I think there's percentages of interactions that result in searches of electronic devices,
How many
and it's like
clients have you had?
0.001.
Yeah. I think I can count on one hand in the last 15 years where I have
Anybody
client.
that's asked, yeah.
And it's usually because of something they say or something
have
they
with them
do. Yeah. You're coming to the U.S. and you say you're a visitor, yet you have a U-Haul full of all of your belongings.
Or you say you're coming to
Wait,
the U.S.
you're not visiting. I think you're immigrating. No, I'm not. And then they say, let me see your phone. See, look, you told your husband here you're on the way today with the U-Haul and you're moving. You can't do that as a visitor. Like, that's legit.
Or the one that I've seen is that you're coming to the United States as a visitor, a business visitor, and you're going to a conference.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got some of your merchandise with you, and you're saying that it's samples, but you got 20 of the same thing,
Yeah.
and it looks like you're selling them. They might ask to see your laptop and say, hey, let's see if this person has been taking orders and is maybe delivering the goods, or, maybe they're
Doing
selling
business, and you
something.
shouldn't be
Are
on
they
a
selling
visitor.
this online and they're delivering it? Yeah. So
The other one is they show up with a work truck at the border with all their tools and everything. Oh, I'm just going as a visitor. Really? Well,
let's
then
see your
why,
emails. Yeah.
why do you need your toolbox and all of your stuff if you're just visiting?
Yeah.
We think you're working. Denied, right?
I've
Or
even
let me
heard
look
of
at your
somebody
stuff.
getting denied, and this is ancient history. This is many years ago, but they owned a house in the United States, and they were bringing all their tools down to do some work while they were going to be.
They will refuse you for that.
Yeah. You
Oh,
can't.
I'm just going to paint my house. You can't do that.
No,
You have to hire someone to do it.
you have to hire someone. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way you're supposed to do it. You're not allowed to work.
Yep. It's funny. Like, if you really understood, and these rules, again,
Haven't changed,
they have not changed. They've been there for decades.
and they've been enforced for decades. It's just we're hearing about it in the news now.
Yep. And for the majority of you listening, if you keep doing things as you have and you're doing it above board, you have no cause for concern. However, if you do fall in one of these categories of the stuff we're talking about, and you are coming and saying you're a visitor, but you're working, well, you should be careful. You should probably get the right visa before you do that.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be saying you're coming to a conference when you're coming to visit a client and perform work. That's unauthorized. You shouldn't be coming to the United States to say you're a dependent while working remotely for your foreign employer.
Mm-hmm.
That's unauthorized. So it does bring to light things that have always been there that they're paying more attention to.
People think that if it's short term, I'm just coming down for 3 days to do the work and then I'm coming back, so it's not a big
Still
deal.
work.
Guess what? You need a visa, even if you're doing 1 day of work.
1 hour.
1 hour of work in
Doesn't
the United
matter.
States. If you're going to be physically in the United States doing work, you need authorization to do that.
Yep. So, and that's really what we've seen in the first 100 days of Trump. Now, the rest of the stuff you're seeing in the news really doesn't apply to a Canadian. Are we seeing people getting? We have another attorney in our office who does removal defense, who is dealing with people that are being arrested by ICE. And if you talk to her, and that would be a great conversation. If you talk to her, the people that are being arrested and detained, we had this conversation yesterday. We were contacted by some farms, and they employ a lot of foreign workers on those farms. And even her who defends these people in court was like, yeah, they should have been detained. These people have entered the United States for the last 15 years illegally, lying every time. And yeah, they're going to be removed from the U.S. So they're detaining people who have violated immigration laws or criminal laws. Now, as with anything, do some people get detained or pulled over and they're innocent and then they prove it and then they're released? Sure, that happens. It's always happened. But that's rare.
It happens in criminal law all the time.
That's why you're innocent until proven guilty.
Not necessarily in immigration, though.
Oh yeah, a different story because it's administrative, right? It's a privilege, not a right. So, but are people being detained for immigration violations and criminal violations? Yes, and that, I guess, that brings us to our next point. So just because you have a visa and you've been issued a visa doesn't mean that you're going to have that visa forever. You need to maintain it. You need to make sure you're not violating that visa. And if you are in the United States on a visa and you get a DUI or you commit a crime, you're at risk of losing that visa. So be careful. If you're in the U.S., you're in another country.
Yeah,
keep its laws.
We're seeing, I mean, this is one change I've seen that I can honestly say is very different now. So
with the e-visa processing and stuff?
Not necessarily the e-visa,
I-140s.
but the I-140. So we have a client who has applied for the first step in the green card process, and their employer has petitioned them for their permanent residence here in the United States. And typically that's a 2-step process. You get the petition from the employer gets approved, and then the employee can say, hey, I want to adjust my status and become a United States citizen on the basis of this approved petition. Formerly, we would not see any questioning of that person's admissibility to the United States until they got to the second step of that, for adjustment
the first
status.
step, they were only concerned with the employment details and the petitioner.
Correct. But we just recently received, and we've heard other employers are also receiving this request for evidence with the petition, saying it was very cryptic, actually. It basically said that there was adverse information about the applicant, and they wanted to have the applicant's U.S. address so they could schedule a biometrics appointment to have this employee show up to give fingerprints, so that they could run background checks on them at a stage where this had not normally been done before.
It's usually at the 485 stage or the adjustment stage.
And the only thing I can think of is that they're doing it now for is because this person, although they do have an adverse information in their background, it's the only reason they would do it is to put the employer on notice. Yeah. And that's what I think this is happening here.
Let the employer know, hey, you're employing somebody who you may want to, think
twice about, right? Maybe you don't know about this background of this employee, and they're saying, hey, we're not going to keep it private from you anymore. And formerly, the process did keep it private from the employer.
Now it's not.
So now this could come to light. So
they would never ask for that before, right? Because, and if you understand immigration, the I-140 isn't about admissibility, right? The I-140 stage is about whether or not, the employment, and whether or not that position qualifies for you to get a green card,
and whether the employee qualifies for the position. Correct.
Just, do you have the credentials? Do you have the degree?
Yes.
Is the job qualified?
Yes. And
then they would approve it simply based on that basis, right? And then the next stage is admissibility, right? The adjustment.
Yep.
We're not going to, sure, you say you want a green card for this, but we're not going to give it to you unless you show you're admissible.
And the employer doesn't need to be part of that adjustment of status. You can deal strictly with the employee. So if there is some information in their background, you can address it at that point with a waiver or whatever's required in order to keep the employer would never need to know. So I think what they're doing here, and this is happening with H-1Bs as well, is
Ls, H-1Bs, potentially TNs by mail, anything like that.
If you are an employee that has something in their background that you would not want your employer to know about, you may not be able to get through this process without them being kept unawares.
Yep.
So think twice maybe before about maybe not starting this process now, or about withdrawing if you do encounter that kind of request for evidence that would let your employer know about your background.
Yep. That's a good point. So again, they're applying scrutiny at a different stage even in this point.
Yep.
Right? Because they've always applied that scrutiny, but they're doing it earlier on in the process. So be aware of that. In just USCIS filings in general, I think we've noticed a little bit more scrutiny. They're just being more diligent, just like at the border. And it, again, like you said, it may just be the adjudicating officer, right? That's like,
Could be.
You could get a CBP officer who's, more diligent than another, or had a bad day, or who knows what.
We've all been to the border and had that person who just easily, looks at your information. Where do you live? Okay. And then you're admitted. And then you also had the ones that ask you 20 questions.
Yep.
And you drive away or walk away from that interaction. And you're like, what the heck is going on? Like, why did I get so grilled on all that information? But it could just be the officer.
Yep. So beware that that's happening. And a visa could be revoked or your status denied if they find adverse information about you. And we're seeing that at an increased level. And at different stages in the process than we have in the past. So outside of what we've spoken, and I wouldn't say there's much to be concerned about if you're Canadian. If you're coming and you visit on a regular basis, you're a snowbird, you work or live in the U.S., you have a business in the U.S., then just make sure that what you're doing falls under your status. And you should have always been doing this. This is something that you should always pay attention to. You need to pay attention to. Now, am I authorized as a visitor to do XYZ? Or am I authorized as a TN visa holder to do XYZ? You need to know and understand your status. You've always had to know that. So if anything, this is just putting that at the forefront of your mind. Just make sure that the activities that you want to perform in the United States are covered under the status that you're entering the United States under. And if everything lines up, you're doing everything that you should on that visa and you're not violating it, then you shouldn't have any issues. And don't commit crimes in general in Canada or the U.S. because they're likely to get you in trouble.
Good advice.
Try to tell my kids that.
Do they listen?
I hope so. I don't know if they have any crimes yet. Hopefully not. But yeah, so good advice in general. Just obey the law. And with immigration, and I can't overemphasize this, immigration has a lot of discretion in it. And they exercise that discretion broadly, and they always have. And with immigration, honesty, being forthright, and with your answers and with what you're disclosing is paramount. Make sure you are being truthful in this process. They're great at spotting people that lie. And lying gets you into trouble much more often than what you're trying to lie about. So make sure you're doing the process honestly and truthfully. And if you do have questions about your status and whether or not you're supposed to do what you're doing in the United States on that status or need to obtain the proper status, well, that's what we're here for. We can walk you through that. And if you do have adverse information in your file, it may not be the end of the world. You may think it's much more than it really is. And we could help reassure you about that as well if you do have something that you need to address. So thank you for tuning in today to another episode of the Rive podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, like, and share it with any of your friends or family out there that you think would find this content helpful. Thank you for listening and have a great day.